Hi, Miles. What's next for XRP? Johnny, good to see you. How you doing? What's next for XRP? Case is about to be dropped is what essentially is next for XRP. Straight after the case, we should be getting some sort of news announcements regarding ETFs happening. There is a tremendous amount of ETF applications that have been filed in with the SEC, from many institutions out there. Then between that, we should be getting regulations coming in as well straight away. Pure, good to see you as well. How you doing? Evening, how you been? Happy Pisces, good to see you as well. How you doing? How you been? Mike, good day, brother. Good to see you as well. How you doing? How you been? Hey, Miles and family, commenters, good to see you as well. How you doing? How you been? When can we see the price action on the market? When can we start seeing price action inside the crypto market space? Well, there's a few things happening inside the crypto market space, which is what is essentially keeping the market space volatile right now. One of them is, without a doubt, is going to be the tariff situations. But the tariffs, as I said previously, they are, essentially temporarily inside the market space. And once the tariff situation is out of the way, good, essentially, for the market space or the crypto market space, because Bitcoin is tending to follow the stock market. Whenever tariff news comes out, the stock market gets hit first. Bitcoin is following the stock market's footsteps. It reacts more like a tech stock, even according to essentially the Standard Chartered Bank, rather than essentially the safe haven and gold asset has been predicted to be. So because of that, the crypto market is slightly volatile. Tariff situation makes it volatile. Every other country jumping on a tariff bandwagon makes it volatile. But the faster we get regulations coming in, the faster essentially we can see price action happening inside the market space. Or the faster we get ETF news happening, or Ripple news happening, essentially, which we're not that far off from everything happening. Good evening, Miles, the CMF. Irvin, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Good evening, Miles, and all the CMF. JP, good to see you, brother. How you doing? How you been? Hi, Miles, the CMF. Stormy, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Hi, Miles and CMF. Dennis, good to see you, brother. How you doing? How you been? Okay, let's do intro, disclaimer, and by that time I was pretty much tuned in for the first part. And the news essentially that we're going to be going through on tonight's live is news regarding, for example, BlackRock, the news essentially to go through on tonight's live. North Carolina, we have an update regarding their filings of their crypto stockpile or Bitcoin reserve assets. We're going to go from tonight's live. We're going to talk about France on tonight's live as well. Yesterday we talked about France's governor, but today essentially we're talking about a French bank coming forward and saying they want to get involved inside the blockchain space, which is incredible to hear. We're going to be talking about the SEC on tonight's live as well, because it was supposed to be the announcement of Paul Atkins becoming the new SEC chairman. So we have an update on that matter to essentially go through. We're going to be talking about the Senate banking committees also on tonight's live as well. We're also going to go through the United Kingdom news tonight. We're going to talk about Circle. We'll talk about stablecoins, United States news, tariff news scenarios, and so many other things essentially to cover on tonight's live. But before we go through any of those news topics, I just want to say to everyone, welcome to the CMF Live if you're watching this for the first time ever. The CMF stands for Crypto Miles Family. My name is Miles. I'm hosting a live that you're watching right now. You can tune into this live Monday to Friday, 11:25 p.m. onwards UK time, where I talk about the most recent news that's happening around the world in terms of cryptocurrencies, CBDCs, AI, politics, and regulations. Vital information for you to know about regarding the world completely transforming into a digital space. And we also do Q&As on this live as well, which means if you do have any questions, put it down inside the comment section. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. And a disclaimer of this live, as always, is not financial advice, not political advice, and what I say is only for entertainment purposes. So, welcome to the CMF Live. If you're watching this for the first time ever, and if you're regular, let's go CMF. By the way, thank you so much to everybody who's liked this live on X. I'm still getting notifications from X, from JP, and everyone else. Thank you so much to everyone who's liked this live on X. Thank you so much to everyone who's retweeted this live on X. Put a comment outside live on X as well. And if you watch us on YouTube, CMF members, thank you so much to everyone who's liked the live as well, and put a comment outside. If you haven't done that, CMF members, just take one quick second to like this live if you watch us on X and retweet it, and essentially put a comment outside the live as well, and like each other's comments. Now, before we go through the first news we're essentially covering on tonight's live is regarding BlackRock essentially doubling down on their Bitcoin acquisition. Before we go through the first news, let's go inside the comment section first, and then we go straight into the first news, and then we go back and forward, comments, news, comments, news. So let's see what's happening inside the comment section first. You think by May we will see things? We will see these things essentially go up in value by May. Should do, yep. Even in Miles, legal season. How you doing? How you been? in general, by first quarter, second quarter, we should be seeing a lot of movements happening. Third quarter and fourth quarter will be even more interesting. Evening, Miles. Lee Robertson, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Good evening, Miles and CMF. Abraham, good to see you. How you doing? Evening. Good evening, Miles. How are you, brother? I'm doing great, Cali. Good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Happy Pisces says, today I heard about dog pools where whales buy XRP via a unique portal where the price doesn't rise or drop much for posted price. Sorry about that. Share the article, essentially. Happy Pisces. I think you sent it to me on Telegram. I still haven't looked into it. You sent it to me today, if I'm not mistaken. I'll take a look at it after the live. Hi, brother. Come on. Good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Even Miles and CMF. Manny, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Love from India, Mr. Recover. Thank you so much. Love from India. Let's go. Welcome to the CMF Live. Now, the first news we're going to cover on tonight's live is regarding BlackRock. It seems like BlackRock has decided to double down on their Bitcoin acquisition. Interesting time to be for them to doubling down when there has been volatility inside the market space. We are coming up to April 2nd, which is essentially the new sets of tariffs that's going to be introduced for every jurisdiction around the world. Also, another interesting time period is that the amount of volatility inside the market space keeping Bitcoin's price volatile as well. Bitcoin has decided taking this moment in time to purchase more. So here's the news. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, has made a significant move inside the crypto space. Its global allocation fund increased its Bitcoin essentially exposure to $47.4 million as of January 31st, almost doubling its previous essential holdings. This decision highlights the growing confidence and institutional investors are placing in Bitcoin as a legitimate asset class. The fund's move essentially is aligned with the increasing acceptance of cryptocurrencies in traditional financial market spaces, and the rise in Bitcoin exposure by BlackRock has essentially comes as aid on a broader trend of institutional adoption with recent essentially regulatory clarity and the emergence of Bitcoin ETFs that have been happening and the large scale of investors that are finding it easier to enter the digital space coming in through ETFs. Larry Fink, the BlackRock CEO, has previously acknowledged the potential of blockchain essentially technology and Bitcoin. The firm's increased allocation further reinforces Bitcoin's role as a store of value and a hedge against inflation, a perspective coming out from BlackRock. BlackRock's decision could inspire other institutional investors to follow in suit, driving further capital into Bitcoin or other crypto assets. Additionally, as more funds increase their exposure, Bitcoin's price may experience upward momentum at an interesting time period with April 2nd coming up. Now, also the Sigma essentially around April 2nd is that the market is either going to go, swinging upwards around April 2nd, or the market's going to become very volatile around April 2nd. There's two perspectives going on right now regarding April 2nd. The confidence shown by major financial players like BlackRock strengthens Bitcoin's position in the global financial ecosystem. So BlackRock has decided to double down and essentially purchase a lot more Bitcoin, mainly regarding their own ETF allocations. Also, BlackRock has a lot of shares in MSTR stock, which is essentially strategy, or was previously known as MicroStrategy. But in general, market space volatile, people selling Bitcoin, BlackRock is buying. Now, on the topic of Bitcoin, North Carolina. As you all know, there are a tremendous amount of American states that have applied for some sort of Bitcoin, essentially a Bitcoin allocation portfolio or a digital stockpile. Now, North Carolina applied essentially and is pitching for the idea of the Bitcoin investment bill for public funds. So here's the bill that essentially North Carolina is thinking about introducing. North Carolina introduces a new bill to allow Bitcoin investments spearheaded essentially by State Senate Todd Johnson and Representative Brandon Jones. The potential allocation essentially of $950 million could essentially induce a significant shift in the cryptocurrency arena, capturing industry attentions as North Carolina steps into the digital investment landscape. And North Carolina's essentially legislators has introduced a proposal allowing the state treasurers to allocate up to 10% of investment funds into its Bitcoin. This move essentially is expected to position North Carolina as a leader in embracing digital assets. The interesting part is Other American states decided to do 10% of allocation towards Bitcoin, but later on they changed their minds to 5% allocation towards Bitcoin, and some of them changed their minds to, in general, creating a digital stockpile rather than just putting all their eggs in one basket. Involved in this political ascension maneuver are Senator Todd Johnson and Representative Brendan Jones. Johnson notes that the bill positions essentially North Carolina for financial innovation, while Jones highlights its aim to modernize investment strategies and proud to introduce the EP287 to establish a strict essentially Bitcoin reserve for North Carolina. This bill essentially will position our state as a leader in financial innovation and cryptocurrency adoption, said Todd Johnson from North Carolina, the state senator. And the announcement has resulted in heightened interest in Bitcoin amidst anticipation of the essentially institutional banks. Bitcoin price rose by 2.8%, with an increased accumulation noted by large holders ahead of essentially further potential legislations coming in. And this legislative move reflects an evolving perspective inside the cryptocurrency role in the state of finances. It presents an opportunity for financial diversification, encouraging other states to consider similar paths in the cryptocurrency adoption or the cryptocurrency ecosystem. North Carolina's approach may lead to further regulatory adjustments to accommodate digital assets going forward for North Carolina or other American states. Drawing in essentially historical examples such as Arizona's similar actions, it offers a potential of a template for future financial strategies essentially moving forward. So North Carolina has decided to join the bandwagon of finally applying for some sort of Bitcoin or a crypto stockpile, and they're calling the filing for essentially this is the SP327, supposed to be introduced in North Carolina. And it is obviously going to show other states that they should be applying for some sort of Bitcoin or a essentially crypto stockpile, which is ideally more preferred. Never put all your eggs in one basket. But it's nice to see essentially more American states jumping on the bandwagon. Some American states have stated they want to create some sort of allocation towards funds of cryptocurrencies and so on. But some haven't taken action and some have taken action. There are 21 American states that have taken action on this matter. Now, moving on essentially from North Carolina to France. Yesterday on this live, I revealed that the French essentially the French central bank chief came out and spewed an immense amount of lies about Trump and his campaign and about the crypto space, and said how Trump is ruining the crypto space. And in reality, Trump is doing none of those things. And instead, he actually is fixing America's economy, and he is introducing a lot of things that are positive for the crypto space moving forward, rather than what France is trying to do is damage their own economy and steal tax-paying money from essentially crypto holders, because they're going to even essentially tax them while they still haven't sold, which is unrealized against tax, which is the most dumbest thing France ever came up with. Now, putting that to one side, there is a lot of positive things also happening in France. One of them being this: a French state-owned bank, BPI France, builds essentially fund plan to buy into crypto. So a French bank has decided today to join the crypto space. The latest player in the world of crypto adoption, BPI France, a state-owned investment bank from France, has reportedly planned to spend 25 million euros, their first investment, 25 million euros, which is roughly about $26.95 million. Moreover, the firm takes a unique approach by opting for a little-known cryptocurrency over the top such tokens in a bid to support the nation's cryptocurrency infrastructure. As per the essentially latest reports that have came out, the same bank has previously spent 115 million euros on investments on blockchain-related projects, including investments in cryptocurrencies. However, this is the first time it has created a dedicated fund plan to buy digital assets directly. In the past, they were just doing essentially random investments. But this time around, they've actually decided to create a fund and fund this account with essentially euros to keep on purchasing cryptocurrencies back to back. Now, they haven't mentioned essentially they're going to be purchasing Bitcoin only or essentially a crypto stockpile. But if they don't mention Bitcoin only, then the only reference is going to be a crypto stockpile, which is the better option. The fund will focus on staking smaller and newly created tokens also issued by French projects before the official listing on crypto essentially exchanges, said Ando. And furthermore, it could also help token essentially projects get listed on exchanges, he added. As per the official statement, the organization has displayed active interest in cryptocurrencies since US President Donald Trump's election victory in November 2024. As I said previously, regarding Trump. Trump essentially leading the biggest market space on the planet, which is the American market space, making the country entirely pro-crypto, making all the government bodies pro-crypto. Even essentially Republicans in general, they're all pro-crypto, but even Democrats are starting to come around and become pro-crypto as well, because they realize, that old saying, which is if you can't join and beat them, essentially is what's happened to the Democratic Party when it comes to the crypto space. But in general, essentially what I mentioned a while ago regarding Trump, biggest market space on the planet, the United States market space, whatever the US does or whatever Trump does or whatever footsteps they take towards this blockchain space, the rest of the world is watching and they're going to follow in suit, which is the exact same thing this essentially French bank has said and come out and said regarding that matter, that there are actually more essentially interest in cryptocurrencies than ever before with all the steps Trump is taking for the United States. And that's one of their reasons for getting involved inside the blockchain sector, or you'd even say their only reason. As per the official statements, the organization has displayed active essentially interest in cryptocurrencies since US President Donald Trump's election back in November 2024. The European nation however, the European nation is concerned slightly that the US embrace of cryptocurrencies could affect the Eurozone monetary authority and financial stability essentially on a large scale. Now, it has also been revealed that they have great engineers and great essentially companies in Europe, including the UK, that are also trying to, compete with the American technology, with the American tech sector when it comes to the blockchain space. Notably, BPI Funds is a financial organization jointly owned by the French state and the country's public lender, CBDC, with a primary objective to serve French public policies. The investment bank is widely used in the nation. So France has decided to do something interesting regarding this French state-owned bank. Not only are they going to start essentially building an allocated fund to go into the crypto space, they have done essentially previous investments inside the crypto space. About 150 million euros was their previous investment, but that wasn't organized, and essentially that wasn't, from a fund in any sort of a way. This is the first time this French bank is creating a fund. These are all bullish signs of essentially more banks and more institutions worldwide entering the crypto space, showing interest in times where some people might think the crypto market is too volatile. The crypto market, is going to be going to some sort of bearish stages, is what the retail section is essentially presuming. Not everybody from the retail section, obviously, some people from the retail section. But on the other side, you have banks and institutions all, widening their reach inside the crypto space, creating allocated funds into the crypto space. The first investments from this allocated fund, about 25 million euros, which is about $26.9 million. But it's incredible. Honestly, impressive, very impressive coming from the French. But the impressive part about it is they want to support French blockchain projects as well, not just American blockchain projects. So interesting way to look at it. But at least essentially they're going towards the American blockchain projects as well, the ones that matter. Now, moving on essentially from this French state bank that's decided to enter the crypto space once again and create an allocated fund to the SEC. Before we talk about the SEC on tonight's live, let's go inside the comment section first, and then we'll talk about the SEC regarding the new SEC chairman, Paul Atkins, coming into power. So let's go inside the comment section first, and then we'll go straight into the SEC news. As I said previously, this is live, which means if you do have any questions, put it down inside the comment section. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Let's see where you're at. M said, if every bank have their own stablecoin, how will it benefit XRP because RLUSD won't be used? True, up to a certain extent. Let's just presume every bank is going to have their own stablecoin, which is very true. Every bank, let's just presume for a second, because it is a debate that is happening inside the crypto space, where essentially a lot of banks have decided to create their own stablecoin. Here's the thing. When it comes to essentially to XRP Ledger, when it comes to XRP, if every bank creates their own stablecoin, there's still a slight issue. The thing about XRP, the token is that it's a medium of payments, which means that a bank in, for example, France doesn't need to be holding a tremendous amount of dollars to be able to do business essentially with an American bank, because an American client wants to do business with a French company. So XRP will play the role of a medium of payments. Now, let's just presume every bank creates their own stablecoin. A French bank creates their own stablecoin. A US bank creates their own stablecoin. If this US bank essentially and this American bank want to do business with each other because their clients want to do business with each other, then they still need to have pre-funded accounts of euro stablecoins, dollar stablecoins, and so on and so on and so on. Instead, they could just use XRP, which plays the medium of payments. So it's just basically a digital version of SWIFT if every bank creates their own stablecoin. Now, what's the point of every bank even creating their stablecoin if it doesn't make any sort of sense if they want to do international, essentially, payments and transfers? Well, domestically, it could benefit them. Domestically, their own clients could start, buying their stablecoin and using their stablecoin. But at this point, if every bank comes out and creates their own, essentially, stablecoin, it's just going to become a niche. It's going to become a novelty, genuinely. If every essentially bank, HSBCs, JP Morgan, Standard Chartered, every one of these banks, comes out and creates a stablecoin, it will become a novelty item. Because domestically, their own clients will use them. BlackRock's clients, for example, will use BlackRock stablecoin if BlackRock creates one. JP Morgan, essentially, clients will use JP Morgan's stablecoin. Essentially, Citibank's clients will use Citibank's client. So domestically, it will be used, but it will just be novelty items from each bank. It's the issue is when it becomes international, that's where the issue lies. Because an American customer wants to do business with a German, essentially, company, then the German, essentially, bank would need to have, essentially, dollars, and the American company to have, essentially, it would still cause confusion, is what the stage we're at right now. SWIFT, essentially, is what that does, where every bank is pre-funded with different currencies to be able to do payments with SWIFT. If every bank creates their own token, it just creates a worse. It's just a digital version of SWIFT. It makes zero sense. So all these news, essentially, you're seeing coming out and saying, Citibank creates their own, essentially, stablecoin. Bank of America creating their own stablecoin. And, essentially, JP Morgan creating their own stablecoin. Fidelity creating their own stablecoin. Or Citibank creating their own stablecoin. Standard Chartered Bank creating their own stablecoin. HSBC Bank creating their own stablecoin. They're all going to become novelty items domestically used by their own clients. But when it comes to international payments, it's where the issue lies. That's when XRP plays the major role of medium of payments, where each bank would only need to be holding a certain amount of XRP to make the payment happen, instead of holding 10 different types of currencies in stablecoins. So you see where I'm going with this? So every bank that's coming out and creating their own stablecoin, eventually they'll just become novelty tokens that their own clients might use, or probably will use, domestically, but not internationally. And that's why Ripple once made an article, essentially, about themselves on their own website, talking about small and medium-sized businesses going international using, essentially, Ripple and XRP and even RLUSD. Because there's the area, essentially, one particular area that SWIFT failed to capture as well was the small and medium-sized businesses that struggle to do international business. So just going back to the whole thing of, if every bank creates their own stablecoin, it's just going to become a novelty item that's domestically used by their own clients. Internationally, that's where the issue lies again. That's where Ripple plays the biggest role with the XRP ledger, where XRP becomes the medium of payments, so international payments can happen. So if anybody's worried that all these banks are coming out with stablecoins, this is bad for XRP, this is bad for the XRP ledger, and so on and so on, with all these banks coming out with their own stablecoins, not really bad in any sort of a way, because domestically they could be used. Internationally is where the issue lies, which again, XRP will play the role of the better project when it comes to international scenarios. So I hope you have a better understanding now regarding if every bank essentially creates their own stablecoin, how will that benefit XRP? It will, because the banks will be using their tokens domestically. Internationally, they're going to still struggle. And regarding RLUSD will be used internationally as well. Is Trump executive order about making FedNow faster something to do with XRP? Solomon, good to see you one morning. How you doing? So I saw Trump's newest executive order, which was signed in regarding digital payments, and America essentially leading the way in the financial sector. Some people are tying that in essentially with the XRP ledger, or XRP essentially being the medium of payments in that matter. Makes a lot of sense. Not saying, the executive order Trump signed stated those exact words regarding, XRP ledger and so on. They're never going to state essentially which, platform they're going to be using, because that would just be a clear signal for everybody in the retail section to go and buy it. The easiest way to tell what's going to be used is based on contracts, essentially, and partnerships and licensings, and what acquisitions essentially they're doing next. But with Trump essentially signing that executive order for digital payments, it is obviously to make FedNow faster. It's also to make FedNow essentially, bring it into the blockchain sector and so on. But in general, it just goes off the back of the topic of America becoming the capital of cryptocurrencies, just adding on that bandwagon even more. Even Miles of CMF, Pierce, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Morning, Miles of CMF. Shelly, good to see you. Morning, how you been? Hey, Miles. Nia, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? How's things? How are you today, Miles of CMF? Lena, I'm doing great. Good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Hi, Miles and CMF. Alex, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Hi, Miles of CMF. Peg, good to see you. How you doing? How you been, Peg? M says, so when the stablecoin bill goes through, XRP will shoot up. Well, when the stablecoin bill goes through, RLUSD will do quite well for itself, but so will USDC and so will USDT, unless they're restricting, USDT due to the transparency situation, which they will do somewhere down the road. Though, USDT is definitely going to have difficulties moving forward. But shooting up will happen regarding regulations, because that will essentially add adoption for XRP. 3 green lights. 1 green light is the case getting dropped. 2nd green light due to its client base being the regulations. The 3rd green light essentially being the adoption rate. But it will do well for itself. Shooting up will be straight after regulations, or shooting up can also happen with ETFs. There's been an estimate that was done about 6 billion to 8 billion should be entering into XRP for XRP ETFs. And there's a tremendous of XRP ETF applications filed in. And the previous one, essentially, by the current, the SEC administration, the current pro-SEC administration, they postponed essentially the XRP yes or no for an XRP ETF. They postponed it because the case is still ongoing. Obviously, the case is coming to an end now, so we know for a fact XRP ETFs are pretty much straight after that. That will help it shoot up, definitely. Hi, Miles of CMF. George, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? So if JP Morgan wants to send money to another bank, and the US will need to use XRP, if JP Morgan wants to send money to another bank in US, they won't need to use XRP. We'll have to wait for global stablecoin regulations for XRP to go as high. No, we don't have to wait for essentially global stablecoin regulations for, well, global stablecoin regulations, not much, but we need to have global regulations in general for domestic and international payments, not just also related to essentially stablecoins, but in general, domestic and essentially international regulations globally needs to be there, not just for stablecoins, but in general. Ross says, boom, Trump destroys the globalist banking cartel. QFS is live. XRP is the weapon. The Fed is dead. March 25th, 2025. President Trump unleashes the economic kill shot, the quantum financial system. Let's go, Ross. But yeah, Ross is on the right lines. It is, essentially the executive order he signed. It is about America, going towards the blockchain space even more and moving away from traditional payment systems. Now, all the traditional payment systems, adapting to the blockchain space. We're going to talk about the SEC because Paul Atkins was essentially supposed to be the SEC chairman. However, it was reported that they delayed his seat. So here it is. Senate Banking Committee delays the vote on SEC chairman nominee. The Senate Banking Committee has reportedly delayed its vote on the nomination of Paul Atkins, who's going to become the actual chairman of the SEC, then, Mark, who's the acting chairman of the SEC. But by the way, Mark has done a tremendous work regarding the SEC, dropping cases left, right, and center inside the SEC, creating a crypto task force, Hester Pierce being in charge of it. Great job so far by Mark, the acting chairman of the SEC. Now, the U.S. Securities Exchange Commission, or journalist and host of essentially Crypto in America podcast, Ella Tarrant, shared this essential development on X. The former Fox Business reporter cited this. According to the aide, the committee will not vote today on Paul Atkins or other nominees as a typical practice. Instead, nominees will be required to submit a written response to committee questions ahead of making votes. A date for the vote has not yet been set, and Paul Atkins, President Trump's essentially picked to replace former SEC Chairman Gary Gensler, faced the Senate's Banking Committee on March 27th. Lawmakers also had a confirmation hearing for Jonathan, essentially nominated to lead the office of essentially OCC. And the essentially Gensler's time at the helm of the top of the securities watchdog inside the US is mostly seen as a negative, obviously, and in anti-crypto space. His regulations by enforcement actions approach that saw the SEC sue multiple crypto companies and launch investigations against obviously several, as one of those things is the commission looking into drop completely. Indeed, several cryptocurrencies rallied in the wake of the ex-SEC chairman resignation. Despite Gary Gensler's exit, regulation remains a very top topic inside the crypto space still till this day. Recent moves to withdraw lawsuits and end investigations suggest essentially this is the case. Facing questions from the banking committee, Atkins says the SEC is under leadership while being keen on regulatory clarity, and a top priority of my chairmanship will be to work with my fellow commissioners and Congress to provide a firm regulatory foundation for digital assets through a rational, coherent, and essentially principled approach when it comes to the crypto space, rather than the enforcement action situation we saw from Gary Gensler. He noted in a prepared testimony, while the report is that the Senate is delaying a vote on his nomination, the anticipation around the crypto ecosystem is that his confirmation is just matters of when, not if. Until then, the attorney, essentially Chairman Mark, the acting Chairman Mark, continues to point to the SEC in what industry players say is the right direction. So even essentially Wall Street or high-profile institutions or even banks so far are coming out and saying Mark, the acting chairman of the SEC, is doing a brilliant job, and he really is. A lot of people thought that Mark wasn't capable of dropping cases or essentially creating some sort of regulations, doing roundtables for the crypto space or anything like that. A lot of people assumed that they would need essentially Paul Atkins to come in to take the rankings, and then things can start moving inside the SEC. But so far, honestly, even I would say Mark has done a tremendous job for the SEC so far and for the crypto space. He's very pro. He knows what he's doing. And we got a good acting chairman on our hands until the real one comes in. Now, moving off essentially the SEC to Circle, USDC. So ICE essentially partners with Circle to boost USDC in finance. ICE essentially being the Intercontinental essentially exchange, the company that owns the New York Stock Exchange. The company that owns the New York Stock Exchange is now, you could say, in some sort of a partnership with Circle USDC. That's tremendous news for the stablecoin space, for the blockchain space, for the United States. The company that owns the New York Stock Exchange is a partner of essentially Circle USDC. Now, both companies announced the deal on essentially today, saying they signed the filings, they filed them in, and they signed the contracts of understanding to explore how USDC can be used in the clearing houses, derivatives exchanges, and other financial services. Lynn Martin, president of the New York Stock Exchange, believes that stablecoins are the future of finance. Lynn said, "We believe Circle's regulated stablecoins and tokenized digital essentially currencies can play a larger role in capital markets as digital currencies become more trusted by market participants as an acceptable equivalent to the US dollar," she said. The plan is to see how USDC can be used not just in crypto trading, but also in traditional markets like bonds and essentially money market funds. Now, Circle's USDC is the second largest, obviously, stablecoin right behind USDT Tether, but USDC has been growing at a much more rapid pace as well, due to essentially Tether being kicked out of the EU on the MiCA regulations for not being compliant, and USDC obviously, positioning itself quite well inside the EU. Now, in the past 3 months, Circle maintained $16.5 billion in new USDC, while only $4.7 billion were essentially printed on USDT. It shows you that Circle is really climbing those ranks when Circle is printing $16.5 billion and USDT is only printing $4 billion. Now, USDC has now a 25.4% market share, up from its 20.7% just months ago. The partnership with ICE could help them push USDC even deeper inside the mainstream finance. And Jeremy, Circle's CEO, says this is a huge opportunity. And this is what exactly says. ICE's reputation and global network across markets offer a unique pathway for Circle to integrate USDC into major new essentially cases, and We are thrilled for the opportunity to innovate together, he said. USDC is already widely used with over 600 million wallets supporting it worldwide, and Circle has also been making very big moves in terms of regulations. It was the first stablecoin issuer to comply with Europe's MiCA regulations, giving it essentially a edge over Tether, which has been delisted from several European exchanges. And in Japan, Circle recently obviously got their approval to launch their USDC and is already listed on SBI VC Trade, with more exchanges expected to follow in suit. Stablecoins are growing fast, and 2024 essentially was the record year. They processed more transactions than Visa and MasterCard combined. The total stablecoin supply has now passed $200 billion, making up to 1% of all the US dollars in circulation. So it seems like Circle is doing wonders for themselves while Tether is struggling for themselves. USDT not printing as much is an interesting one. USDT printing $4.7 billion. USDC printing $15.6 billion. It does show that Tether, USDT, is starting to show signs of not doing too well. Because if you ever wanted to know, is USDT still doing well for itself? Is it still growing? Well, it's printing a lot more less. It's printing less than its second competitor. A lot less. Now, what we're going to be talking about next is JP Morgan. But before we talk about JP Morgan, let's go inside the comment section first. As I said previously, this is live, which means if you do have any questions, put it down inside the comment section. More than happy to answer the questions you may have. So let's go inside the comment section first, and then we'll go straight into the JP Morgan news. And the JP Morgan news we're going to go through is an analyst perspective coming out of JP Morgan for essentially what's going to be happening inside the crypto space going forward in terms of stablecoins. Now, let's see where we were at. Ross says is now active, it's real, it's running, and is powered by the XRP. The Federal Reserve is finished. The Rothschilds are out. The Khazari banking mafia disconnected forever, is what Ross says. Ross also says a new dollar has been born and it's not theirs. Trump's executive order links QFS to the United States Treasury Reserve, cutting off globalist control. No more SWIFT, no more fiat scams. Let's go, Ross. Sub Miles and family, hope all is well. Ray, good to see you, brother. How you doing? How you been? Ross also goes on to say, no more middleman. This isn't a policy tweak. It's a financial cope. Yep. The fractional reserve racket is over. No more printing fake dollars. No more debt-based salaries. Pablo, good to see you as well. How you doing? How you been? Ross also goes on to say, no more central bank leeches draining our future. Every dollar will be traceable. Every transaction accounted for. The media is silent because they know this kills their master's control grid. It basically does, yes, that's true. The media is silent because they know it kills, yeah, repeat the same thing. It kills the control of their grid. QFS, 100% traceability, real-time settlements, total transparency. I agree. It's the digital sword that cuts straight through the deep state economic illusions and the heart of it all. XRP, yes. The same XRP they tried to destroy. True. I agree with Ross. Hello, Miles and CMF. I hope that everyone is doing okay. Scott, good to see you as well. How you doing? How you been, brother? How's things? Now, JP Morgan. JP Morgan's analysts share their latest predictions for the future of the cryptocurrency market space. So this is what JP Morgan's analysts think is going to be happening inside the stablecoin sector as we go on throughout the years of how the market space is going to shape itself. Yielding stablecoins is where they're leaning towards. So JP Morgan said yielding stablecoins, including tokenized US treasuries, are poised to see significant growth and could account for up to 50% of the stablecoin market space, according to a new report coming out from JP Morgan. Currently, yielding stablecoins represent only 6% of their total stablecoin market cap. However, JP Morgan's analyst Nicholas, who is very vocal inside the crypto space and has been quite right in the past on certain callings, predicts that these assets could significantly increase their market share unless regulatory changes intervene. Nicholas said that the US elections in November, the market value of the top 5 yielding stablecoins, Ethernet USDE, SkyDollar USDS, BlackRock's Build, Usual Protocol USD0, and Ondo Finance, essentially USDY, has increased. with their combined market value rising essentially from around $4 billion to over $13 billion. This trend is expected to continue in a part due to the US Securities Exchange Commission (SEC) recent approval of figure markets yielding stablecoins YL essentially DSs. Unlike traditional stablecoins, YLDS is registered as a security, a move that analysts say could further accelerate the adoption of yielding assets. Traditional stablecoins like USDT and USDC do not disrupt reserve yields to users. Doing so would classify these assets as security and subject them to strict compliance requirements, according to JP Morgan's analyst. So, JP Morgan's analyst Nicholas has came out and said essentially that these stablecoins that are going to do tremendously well for themselves are going to be stablecoins that offer some sort of other services rather than just being a stablecoin. For example, a yielding service. Now they're saying based on where they're essentially getting their data from is that the combined yielding essentially stablecoins that that's part of BlackRock, essentially Sky Dollar, Usual Protocol, and so on, and on their finance together, they went from a valuation of $4 billion to a valuation of over $13 billion, and they're saying that is pretty much the next version of a stablecoin to look forward to inside the future, a stablecoin that's yielding. He also said, Nicholas from JP Morgan, who's a very top analyst inside of JP Morgan, he also went on to say that USDT and Circle are going to struggle in this sector of yielding stablecoins. Because he said if they start doing yielding stablecoins of USDT or USDC, then both of those stablecoins would be considered securities, which means they'll be under strict compliance and could also see up to fines as well for not saying earlier on that they're actually securities for them. Let's see how that one plays out. Now, as I said previously, Nicholas has given quite a lot of perspectives out in the past, and some of them have hit the mark. Some of them not so much, but it's an interesting perspective coming out from JP Morgan. Essentially, what stablecoins could do better than others, which is if they offer not just the stablecoin functionalities, but also offer something else to investors, and that will essentially outperform a normal stablecoin because they offer yielding services. Now, SE Foundation is what we're going to talk about next. A lot of people inside the crypto space might have heard of a project by the name of SEI, the ticker SEI, essentially Foundation. And a lot of people inside the crypto space might have, or around the world, might have heard of a company by the name of 23andMe. So an interesting concept is happening between a blockchain project and a DNA company. So 23andMe essentially is when people check their ancestry, when they essentially spit inside of a tube, they send it off to the lab, and it comes back, it says they're half British, half American, half essentially Middle Eastern, half Asian, half African, or whatever they may be. Essentially is what 23andMe. 23andMe essentially might be sold to SEI Foundation, the blockchain project, and they want to put people's DNA on the blockchain. This is an interesting one because we've had data essentially projects, we've had gaming projects, we've had AI projects, we've had unusual AI projects, unusual gaming projects. We've also had data brain cells happening essentially in Switzerland, where there was a company in Switzerland that was producing brain cells. Genuinely, there's a company in Switzerland a while ago, they're producing brain cells and they're selling them for data storage because they're better for AI mining than an AI chip. Essentially, a computer chip will be. Brain cells are obviously more, better in their words. Now, putting that to one side, now they're thinking about putting people's DNA on the blockchain. So this could also be a glimpse of the future, you could even say. Here it is. The foundation behind the Layer 1 project, SEI, announced it was exploring the acquisition of the genetic testing company 23andMe. After the firm filed for bankruptcy, 23andMe, in March 27th, the SEI network said its foundation was considering purchasing 23andMe to defend the essentially DNA of privacy of 15 million Americans by putting the company's data on the blockchain. According to the foundation, if it acquires the biotechnology company, it plans to deploy all the DNA information on the blockchain and return data ownership to users through encrypted, confidential transfers. This is what they said. We believe user data sovereignty is a matter of national security, said the SEI network. When an American biotech pioneer faces bankruptcy, personal, essentially genomic data of millions becomes vulnerable to parties that may not share the same values and transparencies of open space. The announcement comes essentially roughly 4 days after 23andMe has essentially said and filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, a protection inside the United States bankruptcy courts for Eastern District of Missouri. The company essentially said at the time that there would be no changes to way it stores and manages or protects customer data, which reportedly includes genetic information through roughly 15 million people globally. The 23andMe bankruptcy has for many reinitiated concerns about data privacy in the age which companies have caches of DNA information from millions of people. After the bankruptcy announcement, New York State essentially Attorney General Letitia James and essentially California General Rob urged 23andMe users to contact the company to delete their personal data, saying they had the right to privacy and to request any data, essentially DNA samples, to be destroyed. And the two authorities said state laws gave 23andMe user controls of their own data. So we might be getting our first ever DNA on blockchain. And it's not going to be 1 or 2 people or, 1,000 people for test trials. 15 million people about to get their DNA if this acquisition goes through, if SEI Foundation is able to essentially purchase completely 23andMe, because they are in bankruptcy. They're pretty much going to accept any offer walking through the door. So we might be getting our first glimpse of some sort of dystopian future where people's DNA is on the blockchain. Because we've heard about everything pretty much. We've heard about, essentially your entire life being on DNA in terms of, your entire life being on the blockchain space, in terms of tokenizations. Your house will go on the blockchain, your vehicle will go on the blockchain, your documents will be on the blockchain, your passports, your IDs, your driving license, everything will be around you, will be on blockchain. And we're about to get DNA on the blockchain also. The world is moving at a rapid pace right now towards blockchain. Now, moving on from DNA on the blockchain to the EU, the US, Trump, and tariffs. The EU is not happy that Trump has decided to put the tariffs for the automotive industry. Now, as I said yesterday as well, and as I said in the past, the news only tells you half the story. And this is also another reason why the crypto market space is a bit up and down and all over the place. It's the tariff situations, it's the countries that are retaliating against Trump's plans, and so on. There's other factors in play, or obviously the macroeconomic factors that are in play, the war scenarios that are in play. A lot of things are affecting the crypto market space right now. And again, it's because we don't have regulations. The faster we get regulations, the faster essentially utility could be happening, and less essentially manipulation towards utility tokens, because they're essentially being used 24/7 around the world. Now, putting that to one side, the EU is not happy that Trump essentially has put the 25% tariffs on in terms of vehicles coming out of the EU. So here it is. The EU is considering essentially creating some, retaliation measures against the US's services in terms of exports, the response to President Trump's 25% tariff on the automotive industry. And EU diplomats stated that while the US believes it's in a strong position, the US is in a strong position. You know who isn't in a strong position? The EU. It's just incredibly comedy that the EU actually thinks they have a foundation to stand on. Germany's automotive industry is crumbling. France's real estate economy is crumbling. Italy is crumbling slightly as well. So is Spain. And they're the pillars of EU. And they're all crumbling together. But putting that to one side, the potential measures could affect large US tech companies. So Trump goes after essentially EU vehicles, 25% tariffs. The EU decides to tariff back US tech companies, so iPhones, for example, or iPads, or essentially any, in terms of any tech coming out of the US, would be higher tariffed, which means less people inside the EU would buy American products. Now, I don't think that's going to stop anybody from buying another iPhone or another MacBook Pro or so on, but you just be a little bit higher prices. But the EU targets tech giants and aimed tariff tensions in response to the US tariffs on automobiles. The EU is exploring actions against major US tech firms, including the possibility of tightening intellectual property restrictions, and this comes aimed at the ongoing trade tensions between the two regions, with the EU diplomats adding that the ultimate goal is to achieve a comprehensive trade agreement to alleviate the ongoing trade discord. The EU's solution to Trump's tariffs is to tariff them back and then to say, we want to sit at the table. So what about the EU not tariffing Trump and just sit at the table instead? That's exactly what Trump wants. The EU is trying to act like they are the bigger man in this situation by saying, we want to sit at the table and have a discussion. That's exactly what Trump said. Trump said, everybody come to the table and let's discuss it. And everybody said, no, we're not going to do that. So Trump said, well, I'm going to force you to that table by tariffing you into the ground. And then France is coming out and saying, the US is tariffing us, we're going to tariff them back, and we're going to be sitting with them at the same table to have discussions now. Why even tariff them in the first place if you're going to sit with Trump? This is why I say we have genuine morons running countries. Genuine morons running countries. Also, on the topic of vehicles, American vehicles have been tariffed for the longest time, a decade, well over a decade. American vehicles are tariffed quite high inside the EU, so that EU citizens don't buy American vehicles. Now that Trump essentially is leveling the essential playing field by tariffing essentially EU vehicles, it's seen as bullying. The news makes Trump look bad, as if they're bullying the EU right now to the table. But in reality, the EU has been tariffing America for the longest time. And America is the one essentially protecting the EU if anything ever goes down. The EU might also impose limitations on US tech companies affecting their competitive edge, such as actions that could reshape the landscape of international tech businesses and operations. Italy, as a part of its reassessment, is evaluating whether to purchase the Starlink satellite network, signaling a broader implementation for tech contracts. The unnamed EU diplomat remarked that though the US might appear to have an upper hand, essentially, the EU remains prepared to counter effectively. Italian hesitation over the Starlink system illustrates the potential for direct, essentially, impacts on US tech giants like Elon Musk Ventures. The EU previously retaliated by essentially imposing tariffs on US products following earlier trade disputes, showcasing its capabilities of essentially responding to Trump, which is quite ridiculous. Honestly, all these countries that are standing up strong and saying we can defend ourselves against the US and we can defend ourselves essentially against Trump and so on, and Trump is bullying all of us, and in reality, he's not bullying anyone. Honestly, I don't know why, the news just doesn't want to tell the other half of the story, which is America has spent millions, if not billions, if not trillions on this world. Some might have gone for bad, but some have went for good. And essentially, America is spending millions to billions to trillions on this world. In terms of investments, you can even say, protecting the EU being one of them, protecting the UK being one of them, against essentially if retaliation situations happen with Russia and China. So America has had the EU's back since day one, and the UK's back since day one, and a lot of other countries back since day one. For these countries to then, during that time period, be tariffing the US, while the US is protecting them by spending millions to billions to trillions, helping their economy, building their economy, investing into their countries, and protecting their countries. And these ungrateful countries inside the EU, these ungrateful countries that the US has been helping out all these years, and during those time periods, tariffing the US, Now that the tables have turned, where the US, essentially Trump, has came into power and said, enough is enough. We're spending millions to billions to trillions protecting these countries, investing in these countries, building these economies up, for them to turn around and spit it back in our face. For them to be tariffing us while we're the ones protecting them and spending money on them. The tables have turned and the EU doesn't like it. But the EU, again, the news makes it look like Trump is the bad person here, that America is bullying the EU, that America is bullying the UK, and so on and so on. But the reality of it is, anyone would be angry. Anyone would be quite, disappointed that you spend millions to billions to trillions protecting these nations, guiding these nations, investing in these countries, for them to turn around and spit it back in your face. Anyone would be upset on that matter. But again, this is why I say the news doesn't tell you the other half of the story of how the US was treated by these nations. The EU essentially, historically, the EU has leveraged trade restrictions and negotiations favorable outcomes. So as you can see for yourselves, the EU has in the past used tariffs as a tactic for favorable things in their outcomes. US does it, bad. EU does it, it's good. Setting a precedent for current tensions, expert analysts suggest that targeted, essentially tech restrictions could significantly alter US-European technology partnerships. Additionally, this situation may drive innovation as countries use regulations to spur local essentially industries, affecting bilateral tech essentially market access, and potentially financial outcomes include shifts in company stocks valuations due to heightened regulatory risk, and analysts essentially foresee increased investor scrutiny of the US and EU tech environments and emphasizing the strict importance of ongoing negotiations. The new tariffs might essentially mark a significant escalation in the ongoing trade tensions and could disrupt global chains. Joe Doe says, the economist, International Trade Institute. Honestly, the longer the EU keeps on, or any other country, essentially keeps up this charade or the charade essentially of, going up against the US, why is a losing battle? It makes zero sense. The basics of it is any country that goes up against the US will lose in the long term in terms of a tariff battle. In terms of a tariff battle, any country that goes up against the US will lose in the long term. And if the US goes down, everybody goes down, so which means everybody loses. At that point, it's just common sense. Now, moving on essentially from the EU being ungrateful as usual to the UK. Before we talk about the United Kingdom, let's go inside the comment section first. As I said previously, this is live, which means if you do have any questions, put it down inside the comment section. I'm more than happy to answer the questions you may have. So let's go inside the comment section first, and then we're going to talk about the United Kingdom regarding the market space, Fidelity regarding the market space, and a few other institutions that are talking about the UK's market space and the global market space essentially moving forward inside the blockchain sector. But before we talk about that, let's go to the comment section first. Let's see where we were at. We were at here, essentially. Yeah, we're here. No more endless inflation. No more fake bailouts. No more stealing your labor to fund CIA wars and IMF debt traps. The globalists lost their printing, is what Ross said. Orhan says, let's go, let's go. Joe says, evening, Miles CMF. Joe, evening, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Ross also says, not foreign banks. America has taken back the wheel. We were no longer a colony of elite parasites. Well, what's next? I had to authenticate my account to use X tonight. Interesting. Yeah, sometimes you would need to authenticate your account on X to be able to use it. Sometimes they do that. Let's go XRPomi. Let's go Peg. Facts. Let's go XRPomi. Good morning, Miles and CMF. Gusman, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Scott, let's go. UK. The UK a while ago introduced the idea of gilts. Now, gilts essentially was a tokenization feature that the UK is thinking about doing, the UK government. They got the idea essentially from a European country, and if I'm not mistaken, it was Romania or something. It was Czech Republic. Czech Republic introduced the idea of tokenizing essentially bonds and so on and so on, but so did Switzerland in the earlier days. But the United Kingdom got their idea from Czech Republic, and they decided to create their own version by the name of gilts. Now we have updates on the United Kingdom gilts and essentially where they're heading and how far they've got in terms of testings and so on. So the UK gilts reserves gains as investors eye physical essentially and global rate risks. The UK bonds retreated tonight essentially, erasing the gains made after Wednesday's announcements of a smaller than expected debt plan. Investors quickly shifted their focus to nations essentially precautious physical essentially position and the broader risk of raising global borrowing costs. Gilts declined across the curve, underperforming their European essentially counterparts and pushing the benchmark 10-year yield up by as much as 8 basis points to 4.81%, its highest level since essentially mid-January, when global bond sell-offs severely impacted Chancellor essentially Rachel Reeves and physical flexibilities. Although Reeves yesterday restored essentially her physical buffer to exactly where it needs to be in October, firms include BlackRock, essentially all inspiring global investments, and Fidelity's International say UK bond market remains very much at the mercy of external forces. So essentially, Fidelity and BlackRock have come out and said that the UK's economy not so great. The UK bond market, not so great, but tokenization is an interesting feature they're adding to it. Lauren Van Bengen, senior essentially portfolio manager at Allspring Global Investments, noted on this matter, Reeves has very limited headroom and potential domestic and international shocks are numerous. The concern is that the raising essentially global bond yields is essentially persistent inflation and weakening their expected growth could trigger another sell-off in UK bonds, once again eroding Reeves' physical buffer. The Office for Budget Responsibility cautioned that this headroom could vanish entirely if the US President Donald Trump imposes 20% tariffs on global trade if the borrowing costs increase by just 0.6%. The United Kingdom government essentially has came out and said that if Trump decides to do on April 2nd, 20% tariffs across the board for every country, it's going to slowly cripple the UK economy. This is also not a bad essentially scenario. I'll tell you why. Because if the UK is getting pressured by the Trump tariffs that are going to be coming around April 2nd, it means that the UK can go around and push their weight around and essentially make other countries cave into Trump as well, which means we can move on faster from this whole tariff scenario that needs to happen. It definitely needs to happen to restore the power back to the US or to Trump in this case. It definitely needs to happen. So this could actually, and the UK might not be the only country. There might be more countries that will definitely get crippled around April 2nd. Now, he noted essentially that the Vikram, essentially fixed income investment manager at Jupiter Asset Management, said the deterioration in UK public finances can't be underestimated. He noted that the cheapness of gilts doesn't make them an attractive buy. Even though the UK government has created some sort of tokenizations of UK bonds by naming them gilts, apparently investors are not really jumping on the bandwagon for buying UK bonds, because UK's economy is not that strong. But the UK loves sending money to Ukraine. The fragile state of the UK's finances, is heightening essential expectations that the government may need to raise taxes or implement further spending cuts in October's autumn budget. Again, the UK loves sending money to other nations, while their own nation is crumbling and is in a fragile state. Not my words in any sort of a way. These are the words from Vikram, the fixed income investment manager at Jupiter Asset Management. The Office for Budget Responsibility estimates a 46% chance that Reeves will breach her fiscal rule requiring taxes to cover essentially day-to-day spending. Shimon, fixed income portfolio manager at Fidelity International. By the way, a tremendous amount of essentially people have come out from different institutions talking about how the UK needs to fix itself up quickly. Fixed income portfolio manager at Fidelity International said that gilts will probably remain in no man's land until the autumn budget for the UK comes out. He added that they will likely see some physical slippage and buffer erosions. Market essentially movements have been erratic, with gilts experiencing sharp fluctuations driven essentially by shifting investor sentiments. And the UK bonds essentially posted one of their strongest performances of the year following the Debt Management Office's announcement of a smaller than expected borrowing plan. Yields, a 30 essentially year notes, dropped by as much as 9 basis points, their biggest decline since early February. Kimura, the senior UK and European rate strategist at Toronto Domino Bank, attributed essentially that bond rally primarily to favorable issuance figures. However, she emphasized that the underlying reality remains unchanged, with the UK still trapped in a difficult position. Some funds include Vanguard, for example, took confidence from the government's firm essentially recommitments to its fiscal essentially rules, saying that relative cheapness of gilts outweighed the risk around the UK's essentially economy and trajectory moving forward for them. And Ali's head of international rates at Vanguard, you can see the big names that have come forward. I mean, Vanguard, Fidelity, BlackRock, the big names that have come forward, and they're all talking about the exact same thing, that the UK is wasting money. And it needs to focus more on itself than others. He noted that Reeves' firm's stance, essentially on physical rules being non-negotiable, has helped ease concerns about shrinking physical headroom. He expects the UK bonds to essentially regain with the US yields in the coming months. Markets have essentially wavered for months in their approaches to UK gilts, shifting between buying for their high yields and selling over fears that the labour market may struggle to manage the nation's deficit. Vikram Paul, UK's chief investment strategist at BlackRock, noted that the country's borrowing costs remain highly vulnerable to spikes, suggesting gilts could face renewed pressure. So, the UK introduces UK bonds, but a blockchain version, a UK bonds, United Kingdom bonds, blockchain version. It seems like nobody's interested in buying it. And the reason is, from Vanguard's perspective, from essentially BlackRock's perspective, from Fidelity's perspective, and a few other major perspectives, is that the UK's economy is fragile. The UK essentially is not doing too well for itself. They don't know what its future outcomes are going to be, but they're estimating maybe around October we should see a turnaround for the UK slowly, and the UK heading towards the right direction. But in general, their main argument or their main talking point regarding the UK introducing tokenization for United Kingdom bonds, and they didn't do too well on the sales, is that the UK should be really focusing on itself. The same way America is focusing on itself, they're saying, well, the UK should start really focusing on itself and not wasting money on other nations. There's an old saying where it essentially says, turn on the light in your house first before you turn on your neighbor's light. Unfortunately, the UK doesn't want to turn its own lights on. Instead, it wants to go and turn on the neighbor's lights. Coinbase is what we're going to be talking about next. But, saying all that, the UK is trying in terms of crypto regulations to help themselves out. But the US, obviously doing bond tokenizations, sells like hot pancakes, and a few other countries as well. Now, what we're going to talk about next is Coinbase. Coinbase warns that Canada risk losing global economic edge without crypto reforms. Now, there are a lot of countries that are in the blockchain sector. You know, the list goes on. Japan, Hong Kong, the United Arab Emirates, the EU, the US now, essentially Latin American countries. Brazil is doing wonders, Russia, China, Singapore. The list goes on of tremendous countries inside the blockchain sector bringing a lot of innovation to the table. And Canada has been moving very slow, incredibly slow. So here it is. Coinbase decided to, warn Canada, write a piece about Canada, and tell them that you need to start moving a lot more faster rate because too many countries are climbing that ladder inside the blockchain sector to become the capital of cryptocurrencies, while Canada is just standing there and watching everybody climb the ladder. Coinbase cautions that Canada's global economic competitiveness hinges on embracing forward-thinking crypto regulations aimed shifting essentially digital finance trends. The exchange calls for reforms and a balanced innovation with policymaking before the nation essentially has fallen behind. And Canada is essentially approaching a pivotal federal election. And the future of its essentially crypto industry hangs in the balance. In the light of this, Coinbase is sounding the alarm that unless Canada swiftly implements clear innovation-friendly regulations, it risks falling behind its international counterparts. And the exchange's Canadian essentially country director Lucas emphasized in a blog post that Canada has been a leader in the crypto space, in their own words. The lack of proactive policymaking presents a major danger. The same thing essentially the US was falling behind on previously on the Biden's administration. No regulations caused a very lot of confusion, a lot of suings and so on. Is the stage Canada's in. Not a lot of suings going on, but just major confusion going on inside of Canada because for some oddly reason, essentially they don't want to create regulations. It's like they can't be bothered to create regulations. It's not like, it's their job as elected politicians to create regulations, but apparently they don't want to do their job properly. A growing number of Canadians are already engaged with crypto. According to Coinbase, an estimated 5 million Canadians hold digital assets, and public essentially sentiments strongly favors financial reforms. Furthermore, 86% of Canadians believe their financial system needs modernization, with essentially many essentially perceiving it as unfair, and 80% out of the 76% see it as they genuinely do need to enter the blockchain space in terms of privacy, in terms of essentially faster, in terms of tokenization, in terms of so many other things with the benefits of the blockchain sector. If the cryptocurrency industry were more regulated, the Canadians said, nearly a third, 29%, would be more inclined to invest in it in Canada. These numbers highlight a pressing need for the next federal government to embrace regulatory changes that foster financial innovation, because the current Prime Minister of Canada is as useless as essentially Biden was. Genuinely. The Canadian Prime Minister is par on par as useless as Biden was, which means achieved absolutely nothing, filled their own pockets and their family members' pockets with as much tax-paying money they possibly could to date, and then call it a day. Essentially is what the Canadian Prime Minister has done. Now they're essentially waiting for the elections to come up in Canada to see who their next Prime Minister is. Essentially, essentially who has been chosen. We're about to see what this new administration is about to be doing in Canada. But the previous essentially Prime Minister of Canada did absolutely jack squat. Now, these numbers highlight a pressing need for the next federal government to embrace regulatory changes that foster financial innovation. However, regulatory essentially roadblocks have already driven several essentially major exchanges out of Canada's, particularly due to stringent policies on stablecoins and trading platforms. The looming elections presents a rare opportunity for new administrations to implement reforms that support crypto adoption and position Canada as a leader in the global digital asset ecosystem. Coinbase has laid out and detailed proposals urging essentially the incoming government to take decisive actions against essentially decisive actions within the first 100 days of its tenure. So the new essentially administration that's coming into Canada, the first 100 days, again, should be very crucial for them. The same way the first 100 days of Trump's presidency is very crucial. The company's recommendations include establishing a government crypto task force, the exact same thing America did. day one, the moment Gary Gensler left. This group would bring together industry leaders from public and private sectors alongside academic experts to create a national essential crypto strategy and a coherent regulatory framework. Another key recommendation is the creation of a Bitcoin reserve or a crypto stockpile. Altogether, with countries like the United States exploring this essential idea, Canada should be on the footsteps of this too. Another crucial point concerns regulatory clarity on stablecoins. Coinbase argues that stablecoins have the potential to revolutionize essentially payments infrastructures by enabling faster, cheaper, and more efficient transactions. The company also stresses the importance of clearly essentially defining digital assets. The lack of standardization of classification is a major essentially challenge in Canada's crypto adoption rates. Canada's energy resources also present a unique opportunity for crypto mining. The country has some of the cheapest energy in the world, making an ideal location for large-scale crypto mining essential operations. And Coinbase also suggests policy adjustments that will make it easier for the Canadians to develop crypto and AI data centers, potentially attracting billions in investments. And finally, Coinbase essentially calls for an updated regulation that would allow banks to safely hold and use crypto essentially assets, integrate digital assets, management of banking services, and ensure that financial institutions do not deny essential services to Web3 businesses. Despite the regulatory challenges, Coinbase remains committed to the Canadian market space. In an exclusive interview with Essential Crypto News last December, Lucas highlighted Canada's strong essential crypto awareness and relatively clear regulatory frameworks compared to other jurisdictions. In the past, Canada was actually quite a good place for the crypto space. Something happened over that time period where Canada just decided to slow down and not even bother to move forward. But with Coinbase's recommendations, a step-by-step plan, not only Canada, but any other country that's sitting on the sidelines, the step-by-step plan Coinbase has came up with for Canada to follow, I think any other country that's sitting on the sidelines should follow those exact step-by-step plans. It's the steps that America took. Create a crypto task force, standardization for cryptocurrency, stablecoin regulations. He emphasized that Coinbase's registration as a restricted essentially dealer with the Canadian Securities and Administrators in April 2024 was a significant step in legitimizing crypto operations inside the country. Canada is actually quite far ahead in terms of regulatory clarity up to a certain extent, said essentially Matheson, noting that regulatory frameworks have provided a stable foundation for the crypto exchange to operate in, but the only one being essentially Coinbase who got a full-on green light. However, he acknowledged that essentially additional reforms are necessary to ensure continued growth and adoption for the rest of the market space as well. And looking forward, whether the next government embraces Coinbase's recommendations or maintains the status quo on par, the coming months will determine its fate. I do believe whoever is going to be chosen for, essentially whoever's going to be leading Canada in terms of the presidency, in terms of the prime minister, is definitely going to be pro-crypto because he has no choice. The rest of the world is pro-crypto by now. Honestly, the amount of countries that are inside the crypto space right now is tremendous. Now, moving off essentially from Canada's market space to the IRS. Yesterday on this live, I revealed that the IRS was thinking about essentially taxing you through the DeFi space. Now, that rule is obviously being lifted. The IRS has came out with a new tax rule today, which everybody should hear about it if you're American or even if you're not American, because something similar might play out in your own jurisdictions as well. So if anybody's ever thought about going into tokenization or tokenized stocks, this is what the IRS is thinking about introducing. The timing of it is also interesting as well because the stock market is thinking about going 24/7. If the stock market wants to go 24/7, then it has to essentially go on the blockchain. So IRS introducing tokenized stock essentially rules and regulations, the timing of the stock market thinking about going 24/7 tells you that the stock market is about to get tokenized. Here it is. According to most recent tax guidance from the Internal Revenue Services, the IRS, extensive essentially changes to the reporting of digital assets and tax are expected from as early as 2025. More particularly, the agency is shifting tokenized stocks and bonds on option sales and other essentially such transactions from previously used from 1099 essentially B to the new form of 1099 DA. This essentially brings a new level of change in the brokers of how to manage and process providing tax reporting for those new financial instruments, essentially for the IRS going forward inside of this tokenized market space. The new requirements will align reporting on tokenized assets with current tax reporting procedures and help both brokers and investors fulfill their obligations by filing in their taxes, their crypto taxes, and all the tokenized taxes as well. Form 1099-DA is especially designed for reporting tokenized stocks, bonds, and other digital assets. Brokers will use this form instead of their traditional 1099-B forms for those types of transactions. The IRS introduced this change to address the growing prevalence of tokenized financial products inside the market space, and the move essentially reflects the IRS's commitment to updating essentially their tax laws to keep pace with the evolving digital economy. Its main utility is to enhance accuracy as well as efficiency of tax compliance boundaries in tokenized securities utilization and ownership. This will help the IRS to track the flow of the taxable events and ensure that all capital gains or losses are well recorded. These asset holders or traders will be provided with proper essentially records of their transactions to enable them to determine their taxes. In order to assess brokers to move into the new reporting system, the U.S. Treasury Department has introduced the transition rule in this period from the year 2025 up to the end of 2026, allows the brokers to use both the forms 1099-B and Form 1099-DA for tokenized stocks and bonds. Open-ended essentially implementation will allow brokers more time to adjust their systems and reporting essentially in line with regulatory compliance and deadlines. This transition rule is particularly important for traditional essential brokers who may face challenges in adapting to new essential reporting requirements. It provides them with a buffer period to ensure that necessary adjustments are made essentially before Form 1099-DA becomes the mandatory reporting standard in 2027. The introduction essentially form of 1099-DA will provide a clear record of transactions, which will be essential for accurate tax reporting. It will also be enhanced essentially IRS's ability to track and identify tax underreporting in digital asset spaces. So, it seems like if you are inside the United States, and this could be something that implements around the world as well, to be fairly honest. But it seems like if you're inside the United States and you're somebody that's inside the crypto sector or inside the tokenization sector and you want to file in your taxes, the form that you should be looking into as a broker is essentially 1099-DA. Essentially, that's the form you want to be looking into. Now, the interesting part about this is that the form 1099-DA for essentially filing in your taxes for your crypto assets, your bonds, your tokenized actually bonds or tokenized securities or tokenized whatever assets may be on the blockchain, anything related to blockchain and payments. When you're reporting that in 1099-DA, that form is going to become mandatory by 2027 or in 2027. It's going to become the standard form in 2027. Why is this important? It lines up perfectly with essentially what other banks have been saying about 2027, which is HSBC Bank, Barclays Bank, Lloyds Bank, Santander Bank, and a few other banks all stated by 2027 that there's going to be no more bank branches on the high street, no more cash points on the high street, pretty much, by 2027. And 2027 being the mandatory reporting for the IRS for their form of 1099-DA, which should give you an idea that by 2027, a lot of things are going to happen inside this world where we're definitely going to be moving from traditional space fully into a digital space. And now in terms of price points of crypto assets, obviously regulations will be there, utility will be there, which is why I've previously said we're just going to be seeing going higher and higher for utility tokens and the regulations. Now, moving off essentially the IRS and something that could be introduced in other essential nations around the world as well, because tax and crypto, you know how essentially how the game is essentially played when it comes to tax and crypto. Now, Cardano is what we're going to talk about next, and the EU is what we're talking about next. So moving off America and the IRS to Cardano and Europe. MiCA regulations. Every token that wants to essentially be compliant under MiCA regulations has to undergo some sort of testing, you could say. Cardano has just been approved in the MiCA. And it's because Cardano is going around and leveraging their name, as they should do, because they're essentially a part of America's crypto stockpile, digital stockpile. I said this before and I said it again. Any one of those tokens can now leverage their names around, because America being the biggest market space on the planet, and those tokens being a part of it in their digital stockpile. Since that day, Cardano has leveraged their name with Brazil, they've leveraged their name with a few Middle Eastern countries, and now they've leveraged their name in Europe. Cardano has taken a significant step in regulatory compliance by voluntarily essentially filing in an MiCA compliant white paper under the European and under markets and crypto assets regulations framework, MiCA essentially. This proactive move enhances the cryptocurrency's credibility and opens new opportunities across regulated market spaces. The MiCA essentially regulations is a comprehensive legal framework established by the European Union to regulate digital assets. It aims to essentially ensure transparency, consumer protection, and market integrity within the crypto sector. By achieving MiCA compliance, Cardano is demonstrating its commitments to operating within a legal guidelines. And with this essentially certification, Cardano can now be traded on regulated exchanges and platforms across Europe. This development not only essentially strengthens Cardano's market presence, but also builds investor confidence in the asset. And the benefits for Cardano inside the EU market space, increased accessibility for European investors can now trade essentially Cardano on licensed essentially exchanges and fostering mainstream adoption for Cardano. Regulatory assurance, compliance with the MiCA guidelines enhances the platform's transparency and reduces regulatory risk. Market expansions, Cardano's recognition within the EU positions it as a key, essentially a massive key player inside the global crypto market space. With MiCA compliant, Cardano is likely to see increased institutional interest and wider market adoption as European exchanges list other trading volumes could start picking up on Cardano, potentially driving the token's value higher and higher. Not overnight, over time. This essentially milestone is also set a precedent for other crypto projects seeking regulatory approvals. XRP, Cardano, essentially, and Solana being a part of the crypto stockpile for the United States. Any one of those tokens can now go around as a previously leveraged their name. Cardano is doing a good job at leveraging their name on those essentially first in Latin American countries, then Middle Eastern countries, now Europe. It just shows you how accepting countries are when your token has been mentioned by the United States President of America in a stockpile. Now, SEC, talking about America, SEC, also talking about how bullish America is towards crypto assets. The SEC has decided to drop 3 crypto cases back to back. And the French come out and say, or the French chief, essentially, from the European Central Bank yesterday came out and said, the French chief from the Central Bank of France yesterday came out and said, Trump is ruining the crypto space, is what he said. He said, Trump is ruining the crypto space for everyone, for Americans, for the world. Just want to say that. SEC decides to drop 3 crypto cases back to back. That is because of Trump. Just want to point that out, to that French essentially chief. The US Securities Exchange Commission, SEC, has officially announced that its civil enforcement actions against major cryptocurrency firms, Kraken, Consensus, and Cumberland, have all been dropped back to back. In separate filings, the SEC said it was reached joint agreements essentially with Payward Inc. and Payward Ventures, collectively known as Kraken, Consensus Software Inc. and Cumberland DRW LLC, to dismiss the lawsuits with prejudice. The SEC explained that the decision was based not on the merits of the allegations in the respective essential lawsuits, but on the broader efforts to reinform and refresh its regulatory stance. You know what that means? That means the SEC essentially was pressured along, when Trump won the presidency, to become pro-crypto. They said they're not dropping the cases because, anybody did, and it's essentially, they're not dropping the cases because, there's nothing there to find. They're dropping their cases because of how the SEC reacted towards these companies inside the crypto space. And they want to bring some refreshness to the SEC. The SEC emphasized that the dismissal of these enforcement actions does not constitute a change, essentially, in its positions. The Commission's decision to dismiss these actions does not necessarily reflect the Commission's position with respect to any other case, the agency said, because there are still some ongoing cases with the SEC. The lawsuits were a part of the SEC's general crackdown on the crypto industry, which has seen to take numerous enforcement actions against prominent firms. However, this latest development suggests a potential recalibration of its legal strategy, likely influenced by industry pressures and regulatory discussions. It was definitely essentially pressured by Trump's administration. The SEC has more sit-downs with the White House than ever before. So does the CFTC. But in general, what I want to say is, if there are still people out there, genuinely, and it blows my mind that there is, but if there are people out there, on the basis and the topic of only, Trump is ruining the crypto space. If anybody's out there who is thinking to themselves that Trump is ruining the crypto space, the SEC dropped 3 cases back to back in one day. That's because of Trump's administration. The SEC dropping cases like a domino effect is because of Trump's administration. The FDIC, essentially not crippling America's banking infrastructure by forcing them essentially not to go with American companies, essentially blockchain companies or any other blockchain company, is because of Trump. The FDIC was crippling banks, sending them 20 emails back to back not to work with blockchain companies under Biden's administration. They're not doing that anymore. They're actually pro-crypto because of Trump. OCC because of Trump. And I've said this before, and I said this yesterday as well, I said it before again. But even today, we're getting another update with the SEC dropping 3 cases, blockchain cases, back to back. That's because of Trump's administration. That's because of Trump. So genuinely, if there are people out there who assume even for a second that Trump is ruining the crypto space, damaging the crypto space in any sort of a way, you're listening to the wrong people. And you're not listening to the correct people, or you're not reading the facts. And on the topic of the SEC, Ripple and Chipper essentially is the news that's come out today. Ripple and Chipper Cash launch blockchain-powered remittances services in Africa. Now, we know for a fact that Ripple's reach is quite massive. According to Ripple themselves, it's about 80 countries under Ripple that essentially Ripple has expanded into about 80 countries around the world. So Ripple has partnered with their newest venture, African fintech firm Chipper Cash, to bring faster, cheaper crypto-enabled cross-border payments to essentially the continent. The companies announced today Chipper Cash, one of essentially Africa's largest payment infrastructure providers, will integrate Ripple payments into its platform, allowing users to send money across borders more efficiently using blockchain technology. The move comes as crypto adoption continues to gain ground in Africa, especially in the remittances essentially space. And Reese Marek, the essentially Ripple's managing director for the Middle East and Africa, called the partnership a major step in Ripple's expansion across the region. By integrating our technology into Chipper's cash platform, we're enabling essentially faster, more favorable cross-border payments while driving essentially economic growth and innovation. Chipper Cash co-founder and CEO Ham said, crypto integration brings real benefits to African users and businesses, helping them reduce essentially and improve their speed. 2 key challenges in traditional remittance systems: crypto-enabled payments have potential to enable greater financial inclusion, accelerate access to global markets, and empower essentially businesses and individuals across Africa, he said. And the partnership builds on Ripple's growing presence in the region. In 2023, for example, Ripple teamed up with Onfik, a formerly essentially known as the MFS Africa, to support payments across 27 African countries. and essentially key global corridors, including essentially the UK, Australia, and Gulf states. The announcement also follows Ripple's licensing essentially win in Dubai earlier this month, where the company gained approval to offer crypto payment services in the UAE, and the momentum essentially space heels of Ripple's partial essentially crypto victory, but now having a full on crypto victory regarding the SEC only getting paid $50 million and the injunction being completely lifted. Meanwhile, the use of stablecoins, also blockchain-powered payments, continues to surge in sub-African essentially regions. A recent chain analysis report found that stablecoins now account for nearly half of all transaction volumes in the regions in African countries, and a sign that crypto's real-world use is growing beyond speculation. It definitely is. When you see essentially countries, the majority of the country using stablecoin, it is definitely signs of, a sign that crypto's real-world use is growing beyond speculation. But the other thing, essentially, the most simplest way to put it is that Ripple has just signed another payment system platform. Incredible, honestly, because this has just expanded Ripple's reach inside of African nations. So now, obviously, Ripple does have access to about 27, essentially, African countries. They're going to have access to same ones and more on a much more wider scale within those nations. And also, on that note of Ripple's announcement with their new partnership, and all the other news that we went through on tonight's live regarding the UK, we talked about France, we talked about Canada, we talked about the UK, essentially we talked about America, we talked about tonight's live, and the EU in general. We talked about some Asian countries, some Middle Eastern countries, and perspectives from Fidelity, BlackRock. The list goes on of what we talked about on tonight's live. On that note, we have reached the endings of tonight's live. If you're watching this for the first time ever, this was the CMF Live, and this was episode 287 of the CMF Live. You can tune in for episode 288 of the CMF Live tomorrow, same timing as usual, which is 11:25 p.m. onwards UK time. And if you watch this for the first time ever, this is called the CMF Live. It stands for Crypto Miles Family. My name is Miles, and I host the live that you're watching right now. Monday to Friday, this live airs on YouTube and on X Live, where I talk about the most recent news that's happening around the world in terms of cryptocurrencies, CBDCs, AI, politics, and regulations. These are all vital information for you to know about regarding the world completely transforming into a digital space. And the disclaimer of this live, as always, has been not financial advice, not political advice, and whatever I say is only for entertainment purposes. And we've also always done Q&As on this live as well. So, if you do ever have any questions when you're tuning into this live, drop your questions inside the comment section. I'll be more than happy to answer the questions you may have. Obviously, I'm going to go through the comment section before we do go off, but I just want to say one quick thing. If you have essentially, if you're watching this on YouTube and you've subscribed to me during this live, thank you so much for subscribing to me, and welcome to the CMF family. And if you're essentially watching this on X and you followed me on X during this live as well, thanks so much for following me on X, and welcome to the CMF family as well. Everything I provide, I just want to put that out there, everything that I provide is completely free of source, and it's completely free source. We have a Telegram group, which anybody is more than welcome to join. We have essentially our own X communities page, which anybody's more than welcome to join as well, which is on my X profile, if anybody wants to go and check it out, on my Twitter profile, essentially. And let's go to the comment section, obviously, before we do leave. And by the way, thank you so much to everybody from the CMF or anybody new that liked this live, commented on this live, outside the live, and retweeted this live on X. And thanks so much to everybody from the CMF who liked this live on YouTube and put a comment outside as well. So before we do, obviously, let's go to the comment section first. Let's see where we were at here. Would the odds be high or low that Gensler skimmed some money from the millions that the SEC got from suing everyone who ends up in prison? The odds are quite high that Gary Gensler definitely skimmed off some money. Keep up the good work, Crypto Miles and CMF. Thank you so much, Bitcoin's finest, for the kind. Thank you so much, Bitcoin's finest, for the kind words. Honestly, thank you so much. They can't keep track or normal taxes. Never mind the new 99s or anything else. Lol. Sorry for my lateness, Miles. Family, no problem. Ian, good to see you. How you doing? How you been, brother? The French are full of, yeah, they definitely are. I agree 100%. They are talking about the meme coin market, and they're talking about the meme coin. Good night, Miles, and all CMF. Thank you for a great live and news. JPC tomorrow, but at the same time as usual. Thanks, Miles. Good show. Good night, CMF. Orphan, see you tomorrow, same time as usual as well. Thanks, Legend. Night and day, CMF. Let's go, Shelly. See you tomorrow, same time as usual. Night, Miles. Pablo, see you tomorrow, same time as usual as well. Thanks, Miles. Good night, CMF. Stormy, let's go. See you tomorrow, same time as usual. Great information, as always. Curtis Hill, see you, brother, same time as usual. I will be seeing everybody tomorrow, same timing as usual, 11:25 p.m. UK time onwards. See everybody tomorrow, CMF. Everybody have a great day or a good night, depending on where you're around the world. CMF, see everybody tomorrow, same time as usual. Like, comment, share, retweet. If you're watching the YouTube, like as well, subscribe and follow. See everybody tomorrow, same time as usual. Everybody have a great day or a good night, depending on where you're around the world. See you tomorrow, same time as usual. CMF, 11:25 p.m. UK time onwards for episode 288 tomorrow.